Program Director at Western Resource Advocates, a nonprofit law and policy organization dedicated to protecting the West land, air, and water. Jennifer Pitt manages Environmental Defense Fund's efforts on the Colorado River to protect and restore the Delta and reform water policy. And Tom Chart has worked for a variety of state and federal agencies throughout his career, most recently accepting the position of Director of the Upper Colorado River Endangered Fish and Recovery Program in 2009. So without further ado, why don't we welcome our speakers for tonight.
Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here. And I feel like, though I didn't make the last talk, I know you had Justice Hobbs and Professor Larry McDonnell. I feel like it's really an honor to be in the same lineage, or at least the same series with those amazing people, both of whom I've met and who are inspirational to me. I work on water resources at Western Resource Advocates, and I manage a team of people, and we work on a host of issues, and this is kind of a sampling of some of the work that we have done over the last several years on the Colorado River and issues that arise. We are very much looking at a system that's going to change. Most climate projections show that there'll be 60 to 20% less water in the Colorado River Basin by 2050. And this is causing federal agencies and water managers and just members of the public to reassess both how we're meeting our needs now and how we'll meet them in the future. And even if things weren't changing, even if we had a status quo of the water that is currently being used, there are a broader range of issues and uses of the river, Colorado River and all its major tributaries, than there were just 20, 30 years ago. I'll mention three basic threats or emerging issues, one related to power generation, electric generation, oil shale, and new large-scale water pipeline projects. And I'll try to wrap up with something a little more rosy as far as what are some of the things we can do to address those concerns, either avoid them completely or mitigate them, and some of the things that we can do proactively to actually protect stream flows in the Colorado River. Power generation, this is a map of the basin that has at least some of the major fossil fuel power plants, and there's several in each of these western states. Collectively, they consume over 167,000 acre-feet of water every year, and the big black dots here are coal plants. The small red ones are gas-fired. But individually, there are plants in Colorado, Wyoming, that consume anywhere from 15 to 25,000 acre-feet, and that total 167 is more than the entire city of Colorado Springs uses. And this graphic showing water intensity, that is the amount of water per megawatt hour generated, shows that on the left side, the conventional forms of generation like coal and nuclear, if that's conventional, use somewhere between 500 and 600 gallons per megawatt hour. Some of the emerging fossil-based technologies that include carbon capture and sequestration would actually use even more water per megawatt hour generated. And importantly here, at the renewable end, even though some renewables are going to use just very similar amounts of water, like the concentrated solar power, there are some forms of renewables like wind and solar photovoltaic that really don't use any water at all. You might use a little water to wash the solar PV panels. But importantly, not even on this chart for generation, every megawatt hour, every kilowatt hour that you don't have to use, if you've either put enough insulation in your attic that you don't have to heat with electric baseboard heat, or if you put enough light bulbs in that are high efficiency, you're no longer needing to generate electricity of any kind. So that's not on this graphic, but that's certainly also another zero contributor as far as water used for generation. And I'm sure many of you have heard a little bit about it. This is a circle up in the northwest corner of Colorado, which is really a large, rather enormous oil shale deposit. Oil shale, as many of you will know, is rock. It's not oil, it's rock underground at great depth that requires a great amount of water and energy to cook it into something that looks like kerogen and then could be refined into some sort of fossil fuel. So collectively, the volumes of water we're talking about are rather enormous. It's really cornering the market in some sense. The absolute water rights, the ditch rights for more than 100 irrigation ditches is 650 cubic feet per second in the Colorado and White Rivers. And those conditional total here as far as demand for water for a large-scale oil shale industry could be collectively, including the water needed for processing, the water needed for the energy to cook the rock, as well as to meet the needs of new human populations that may be working in these areas, could total as much as 378,000 acre feet, well over what Denver water consumes annually. And one other threat, and it's marked here in yellow, would pull water from the Colorado River Basin, specifically Flaming Gorge Reservoir, and pull it over to the Front Range of Colorado. This is a blow-up of this Flaming Gorge pipeline, and perhaps you've heard about this or seen it in the paper. I know that several articles come out every week, at least in the Pueblo Chieftain, talking about the benefits of this pipeline, 560 miles long, that would pull water from southwestern Wyoming, bring it along the I-80 corridor, and then down to the Front Range of Colorado. He says it'll meet the needs of cities, it'll meet the needs of farmers, it'll meet the needs of endangered fish in the South Platte Basin because it's pulled water from the West Slope. And indeed, at a public hearing, when someone raised the issue of what about introducing exotics like quagga mussels from the Green River over to the Front Range, he said, well, we'll take care of that by boiling the water. Now, boiling 81 billion gallons a year is absolutely infeasible, and it's an amazing thing because this project is actually getting a lot of credence. It would be the most expensive water in Colorado history. Even at the low end, the proponent, Aaron Million, proposes that the project would cost $3 billion, where the state of Colorado has estimated $7 to $9 billion. It would have enormous impact on the Green River, taking in every year at least 250,000 acre feet, and in some years almost 350,000. But when you feel that a combination of approaches through water conservation, sharing water with agriculture, that is agricultural interests entering into agreements to share water with cities in different years, fallowing some of their lands and making it available for city use, reusing supplies that are available for reuse, and many of the water sources in Colorado can be reused over and over until that water source is gone, and some smaller scale projects along the lines of some that have been proposed more locally. For instance, the Moffett expansion, that's for the city of Denver. They want to expand the size of their existing reservoir. It's possible that they can build that and mitigate its impacts and meet some needs through that small project rather than a giant one. And I leave you with this question, and I hope it comes up. The bigger question for us is, how do we address the larger threats to the basin? Is it on a piecemeal kind of project by project, river segment by river segment basis, or is it something we can attack with a more, not generic, but more uniform approach, which collaboration between federal, state, and other agencies? Is there a way to kind of formalize ways to protect flows throughout the river? Thanks very much.
Well, good evening, and thank you very much for having me here. It's an honor. I have, for years, been a follower of the State of the Rockies project. I work for an organization called Environmental Defense Fund. We're a national group, and we work on a whole array of environmental issues, but we do have a Western Water Program, and I have the good fortune to be the person working on the Colorado River. A lot of the time these days, we are talking about the Colorado River as a supply for some of the new or marginal uses on the river, the growing uses, which are the cities around the basin. You've already heard we have, upwards of 25, I've even heard as high as 30 million people drinking Colorado River. And they range, really, it's not just the Southwest, it's from Denver all the way down to San Diego and Los Angeles, and actually down in Mexico, and Tijuana even gets some of its water from the Colorado. And I've spent a good bit of my career at Environmental Defense Fund focusing on the river where it's not really a river anymore. The bottom picture there is the Colorado River sinking into the sand between the state of Arizona and Baja California. So actually the Colorado River is drying up on American soil. And I find that somewhat remarkable, and that's sort of an artifact of environmental management at borders, which I'm not going to talk to you about tonight, but is a fascinating subject. Maybe one of the most telling things I can show you is this graph that depicts river flow, the blue line from 1906 and the pink line from 2004, and this is gauged flows, monthly average, or the monthly flow just below Hoover Dam, so it's northern Arizona. And what you can see was this huge spring runoff before we had dams and water use on the system that was creating that giant peak and a lot of flooding, which serves an ecological function. And then today's flow, which is really pretty steady year-round, and largely that's because we're delivering water to year-round uses in the southern part of the basin. The crops there are grown year-round. Our winter vegetables in the United States largely come from Southern California and Arizona and northwestern Mexico. We also have urban areas, landscaping that requires year-round maintenance in those warm areas. So we're seeing pretty steady flows. And that has dramatically changed how our rivers work. So what I really wanted to talk to you about is this graph, and I'm going to show it to you a few times and explain it to you, so hopefully you'll get it by the time I'm done. What it shows is the 10-year running average of supply on the Colorado River. That's the black line that's bouncing around. It's a very variable river system. And the 10-year running average of the demand line. This is for the whole basin. So that's the gray line climbing up. We start this graph, the x-axis going across the bottom is 1922, the year the compact was signed. And you can see how it climbs as the population of the West grew, and we came up with more ways to use water. And the first thing I want you to notice about this graph is that the supply line and the demand line have crossed recently. And that tells a big piece of the story about why maybe what you hear right now in the news, people who are talking about managing the Colorado River, the tone has changed a little. If I have any thoughts for a conclusion, I mean, it's sort of a depressing picture maybe that I laid out, except that I think this growing recognition that we live in an age of limits, that water from the Colorado River is not endless, that we cannot keep just using more. And we have been until this point, but we cannot do that anymore. That in that series of decisions and compromises and agreements and conversations, we might also be able to right some of the wrongs that have been done on this river and prevent future inadvertent problems that we don't really want to have to live with. Thank you very much.
I am the program director for this endangered fish recovery program and have been for the last couple of years. We are tasked with recovery, not just avoiding jeopardy, but actually trying to get 4 endangered species off the list. And from top to bottom, that's the humpback chub, the Colorado pike minnow, the bony tail, and the razorback sucker. So what I'd like to touch on today, if I can, is why this program came about. I think you probably understand that. Some of the management actions that we're working on right now and the status of those. The endangered fish themselves, and I'll talk a little bit about their population status, and then ongoing and future challenges. And then the other component of research and monitoring is to go out there and try to determine the response of the endangered fish to all these recovery actions that we're doing. Are we removing enough non-native fish? Are we providing enough flow out there? Are we restoring floodplain habitat to the level that we need to? Critical questions. We've been at this since 1988, but these are, it's an ecosystem that has been impacted for a long period of time, and we're dealing with long-lived species, and it's going to take quite a while to reach our goals. And then we really do need to find a mechanism that will legally protect these endangered fish flows beyond the life of this program, because if we don't, these fish will just get back onto the endangered species list.
Come have your voice heard regarding the issues about the Colorado River on December 5th, where we will talk about climate change and the effects it has on the Colorado River.